When we gather in a hall such as this, we do not merely assemble as people with names, occupations, and histories. We gather as living expressions of the psyche itself. Each of you carries within the quiet chambers of your heart a story that is not entirely your own, for in your dreams, in your shadows, in your inexplicable movements of feeling, the archetypes of humanity breathe and act through you. Tonight I wish to speak to you about the peculiar burden of the empath, the one who absorbs, who feels, who suffers in silence, and why the act of quiet withdrawal, the creation of distance, holds greater power than the eruption of anger. Anger, my friends, is a flame. It bursts, it consumes, it illuminates for a brief moment the theater of conflict. It declares with force, I am here, I resist, I refuse, but like any flame, it is bound by fuel, by oxygen, by the proximity of what it burns, and once the fire subsides, it leaves behind smoke, ashes, and often the regret of destruction. Yet distance true, soulful distance, is not the absence of power, but the channeling of power into another dimension. It is a silent act of saying, I will not participate in this pattern any longer. I withdraw my energy. I no longer consent to be your mirror, your scapegoat, your container. In that quiet gesture, there is a power that shakes the foundations of relationships, societies, even entire epochs of human consciousness. The empath is one who has always been attuned to the subtle frequencies of others from childhood. Often before they could form words, they felt the storm in the air when a parent was tense, the tremor beneath the smile, the secret grief behind the laughter. Such sensitivity is not chosen, it is archetypal. It arises from the ancient function of the psyche to bind the group together, to protect the tribe, to sense danger before it manifests. The empath is a carrier of an archaic wisdom. To survive, one must feel beyond one's own skin. Yet this gift is also a wound, for in modern society, where emotions are often repressed, denied, or weaponized, the empath becomes the unwitting vessel of what others cannot face in themselves. You may recognize this pattern in your own life. You walk into a room, and before a word is spoken, you feel the heaviness of another's despair. You listen to a friend, and their anger echoes inside your chest as if it were your own. You find yourself inexplicably drained after encounters, not because you gave too much, but because you unconsciously carried what another disowned. And when you finally resist, when you cry out in anger, the world dismisses you as unstable, hysterical, too sensitive. Anger, for the empath, becomes a double wound, the wound of carrying too much and the wound of being misunderstood when you finally release it. That is why quiet distance is the higher alchemy. Imagine a dream where a figure approaches you again and again with demands, accusations, or projections. In the dream, you scream, and the figure grows larger, more grotesque, feeding on your reaction. But in another dream, you simply step back, you refuse the script, you let the figure dissolve into the fog of its own making. In that silence, the archetype loses its grip, the projection, denied fuel, returns to the one who cast it. And thus, by your distance, you compel the other to face what they had hoped you would carry. This is not indifference. This is not the cold withdrawal of the narcissist who feels nothing for the suffering of others. No, this is the sacred withdrawal of the empath who finally recognizes, my soul is not your dumping ground. It is the boundary that allows compassion to remain pure, uncorrupted by exploitation. For when you step back in silence, you do not merely protect yourself, you restore the sacred economy of energy. You return to the other what is theirs to face, and you reclaim your own life as the vessel of your destiny. In the depths of the unconscious, anger belongs to the archetype of the warrior, the protector, the one who defends the boundaries of the self and the tribe. Anger is not evil. It is necessary, but when an empath relies only on anger, they fight battles that are not theirs, wield weapons forged from the projections of others. Distance, on the other hand, belongs to the archetype of the sage, the hermit who withdraws into the cave, not to escape, but to gain vision. Distance is the path of transformation, where one silence speaks louder than 1,000 accusations. Think of Christ before Pilate, silent before the jeering crowds. Think of the Buddha beneath the Bodhi tree, unmoved by the armies of Mara. In these moments of profound silence, the figures of myth and history did not engage in the drama of conflict. They allowed the storm to rage and revealed by their distance that the storm was never theirs. This is the model for the empath, not to conquer with the sword of anger, but to dissolve the pattern through refusal, through stepping outside the game entirely. The psyche, however, does not make this easy. In your dreams, the shadow will appear as a persecutor, a pursuer demanding your attention. The unconscious wants to lure you into reaction, for it is in reaction that patterns reveal themselves. Yet the higher task, the task of individuation, is not to endlessly react, but to transcend the cycle. Each time you withdraw from a toxic entanglement without bitterness, you ascend a rung of the ladder of individuation. You claim more of your own psychic territory. You step closer to the self, the divine archetype of wholeness within you. But let me be clear, distance is not avoidance. To avoid is to flee in fear, to deny what is within yourself. Distance is conscious, deliberate, and born of strength. When you create distance, you are not running. You are choosing. You are saying, I see what is happening. I understand the pattern, and I will not be its actor. You remain rooted in your center, observing without absorbing. That is the quiet power that terrifies those who feed on reaction. For when you cease to react, their control dissolves like mist under the rising sun. The empath's quiet distance is therefore more than a psychological tactic. It is a mystical act. It is the refusal to be possessed by collective shadow. It is the silent exorcism of projections. It is the alchemy of transmuting pain into wisdom, not by fighting, but by withdrawing into the sanctuary of the self. And when you embody this, when you live it, you become a mirror, not of their darkness, but of their possibility for transformation. The world will not applaud you for this. Many will call you distant, cold, unfeeling, but within your silence, the archetypes shift. Within your distance, souls are confronted with themselves. And within your solitude, the self whispers, "You are free." The empath's journey toward distance is not linear, for the psyche resists separation from what it has long identified with. You see, the empath has unconsciously woven their identity through the feelings of others. They say, "I am compassionate, I am kind, I am one who bears the burden." And though this sounds noble, beneath it lies the archetypal wound, the child who was forced to regulate the emotions of the parent, who learned that love is earned by carrying pain. Thus, when the empath finally chooses distance, the unconscious fears annihilation. Who am I? If I am not the caretaker of everyone's storm, who am I? If I let them fall into their own chaos? This is where the individuation process becomes both a crucifixion and a resurrection. For distance requires the ego to die to its illusion of indispensability. It demands that the empath confront the shadow of pride hidden within compassion, the subtle arrogance that says, "Only through me will they survive." And when that illusion falls away, what remains is a deeper, truer love, not one of possession, but of freedom. Dreams often reveal this transition with striking imagery. An empath may dream of being chained in a dungeon, carrying stones upon their back, surrounded by faceless figures demanding more. When the dreamer finally sets down the stones and walks away, the figures scream, dissolve, or shrink into children crying for a parent. Such dreams are not mere fantasies. They are dramatizations of psychic truth. They show how projections feed on the compliance of the dreamer, and how withdrawal returns the burden to its rightful owner. But here lies the paradox. Silence and distance often feel crueler than anger, both to the empath and to those entangled with them. Anger is visible, dramatic, and it offers the illusion of engagement. Silence, on the other hand, creates a void, a mirror that offers nothing, and in that nothingness, the other is forced to meet themselves. This is why distance is so powerful. It does not destroy, it reveals. It reveals what is broken, what is dependent, what is hollow. It reveals what cannot stand on its own once the empath has stepped away. Archetypally, this act of withdrawal aligns with the motif of the descent into the underworld. In myth, the hero must leave the familiar world, descend into darkness, and confront the forces that dwell in shadow. For the empath, the underworld is solitude, the silence in which they hear their own heartbeat apart from the noise of others. It is terrifying at first, for the silence feels like abandonment, like death. But it is in this very silence that they meet the self, the eternal core of the psyche, untouched by the chaos of the collective. I tell you, many empaths are afraid of this silence because they confuse it with loneliness. They equate solitude with rejection because their earliest memories link separation to pain. Yet true solitude is the sanctuary of the soul. It is there that the archetype of the wise old man, the inner guide, the self, begins to speak, and what it whispers is liberating. You were never meant to carry what is not yours. You are not here to bleed endlessly for the wounds of others. You are here to become whole, and from that wholeness, your compassion will be like a river flowing but never depleting its source. Consider the symbol of water, which recurs in countless dreams. Water is the image of emotion, of the unconscious, of life itself. The empath often dreams of drowning, being swept away by waves, submerged beneath floods. These dreams reflect the overwhelming nature of absorbing too much, but when the empath learns distance, water changes form. It becomes a calm lake, a flowing river, even a cup of clear drinking water. No longer is the empath drowning. Now they are drinking. They are nourished, sustained, and able to give without depletion. Distance is what turns flood into sustenance, chaos into clarity. Anger, by contrast, often appears in dreams as fire, explosive, uncontrollable. Consuming fire is necessary to purge, to burn away illusions, but it cannot sustain life. A life lived in perpetual fire becomes scorched, barren. Distance, however, is the balance between fire and water, the capacity to withdraw without being consumed, to feel without drowning. That is why it is more powerful. And let me tell you something difficult. When you begin to practice quiet distance, many around you will resist with all their might. They will accuse you of betrayal, of abandonment, of selfishness, for you are dismantling the unconscious contract they forged with you, that you will carry their darkness so they never have to. Your silence forces them to face what they had hidden. And this confrontation is rarely welcomed. Do not mistake their anger for truth. It is simply the shadow's protest. As it is dragged into the light, the archetype of the trickster may also emerge here. The trickster thrives on confusion, in guilt and manipulation. It whispers in the empath's ear, "You are cruel for walking away. You will be alone forever. You owe them your energy, your life." But the trickster is not evil. It is a tester, a teacher. It challenges the ego to discern illusion from truth. When the empath withstands the trickster's accusations, they prove their readiness to stand in the strength of the self. I recall many patients who told me of this battle. They describe partners, parents, or friends who erupted in rage when they finally set boundaries. They described nights of guilt, of questioning whether they were heartless, yet in time they discovered a peace they had never known before. They found that their compassion, once drained, now blossomed anew, not because they gave it all away, but because they had learned to hold it within. This is the secret power of distance. It restores the natural flow of love. And there is something even more profound. Quiet distance does not only heal the empath, it heals the field of relationship itself. By refusing to play the role of carrier, the empath disrupts the unconscious collusion. They force the other to confront their shadow, yes, but they also open the possibility for authentic connection. No longer is the relationship based on exploitation. It becomes an invitation to meet each other as whole beings. In this sense, distance is not rejection. It is the highest form of respect. For only when you refuse to be consumed can you meet another soul as they are, without distortion. You may ask, but how do I endure the pain of their accusations, the loneliness of withdrawal, the fear of being misunderstood? I tell you, the answer lies in the archetype of the self. When you withdraw, you are not retreating into emptiness, but into fullness. You are retreating into the eternal presence within you that does not depend on validation, applause, or recognition. This self is like the sun. It shines regardless of clouds, storms, or night. It sustains life by its very being, not by striving. When you rest in the self, distance is no longer exile, it is return. So I invite you to imagine this, a dream where you stand on a mountain, looking down at the valleys below. Once you lived in those valleys, entangled in the dramas, the conflicts, the storms. You shouted, you fought, you wept, but now you stand above, not with arrogance, but with clarity. The storms still rage below, but you are no longer tossed by them. You feel the wind on your face, the strength of the mountain beneath your feet. And from this height, you can see more clearly, love more deeply, and give more wisely. That is the empath's destiny, not to drown in the waters of others, but to stand on the mountain of the self, from which true compassion flows like a river that never runs dry. The shadow, that eternal counterpart of the ego, is never so insistent as when we withdraw, when you refuse to react, when you practice quiet distance. The shadow of the other grows restless, desperate, for it seeks recognition. You have long been its host, the vessel through which it expressed itself safely. Now, denied that channel, it prowls about like a hungry animal. And what you will see, if you dare to look with the eyes of the soul, is how the collective shadow presses against the empath, for it is not merely personal, it is archetypal. When you hold silence, you are not only dealing with one individual's anger or disappointment, you are confronting the whole history of how humanity has displaced its unwanted truths onto the sensitive ones. In every tribe there was the scapegoat, the figure onto whom the sins of the collective were cast. In every family there is the child who feels what no one else will acknowledge. And in every culture, there is the prophetic figure who, through their very presence, reveals the sickness that festers beneath the surface. The empath belongs to this lineage, not by choice, but by destiny. Yet, destiny is not imprisonment. It is only when the empath awakens, when they see the pattern, that they may choose another way. This is why I tell you, quiet distance is not cowardice. It is prophecy. It declares with no words at all, the scapegoat shall no longer carry the sins of the tribe. The silent withdrawal is a sacred refusal to continue an ancient injustice. And because it is archetypal, the reaction it provokes is fierce. Others will feel betrayed, as if you have broken a law written in their bones. And in truth, you have broken a law, but it is the law of unconscious collusion, not the law of the soul. Myth shows us this again and again. Think of Prometheus, who stole fire from the gods and was punished not for his violence, but for his refusal to accept their dominion. Think of Psyche, who was told never to look upon her lover's face, and yet, in silence, she broke the pattern of blind obedience, forcing truth into the light. These stories remind us that distance is not passive. It is active, disruptive, revolutionary. To step aside from the game is to collapse its entire structure, but there is something even subtler. When you choose quiet distance, you awaken a new archetype within yourself, no longer merely the empath or the scapegoat. You become the alchemist. You transform suffering into wisdom, projection into reflection, silence into revelation. In dreams, this often appears as the image of gold, of a vessel glowing from within, of a hidden treasure buried in the earth. The unconscious is telling you, you are transmuting the very energy that once drained you, is now becoming the substance of your individuation. Yet beware, for the ego is cunning. It will attempt to use distance as a mask for avoidance. It will say, I am enlightened. I need no one. I float above it all. But this is not distance. This is dissociation. True distance does not deny relationship. It transforms it. It does not float above life. It steps back into life more deeply, from a center that cannot be shaken. You must discern the difference. Dissociation is brittle, easily broken. Distance, born of the self, is supple, rooted, eternal. And here lies a great mystery. Distance is not emptiness. It is space. It is the space in which the soul can breathe, in which new forms of relationship can emerge when you no longer collapse into the emotions of others, when you no longer fuse with their storms. A new possibility arises. Relationship becomes not an unconscious merger, but a conscious encounter. You meet the other not as a savior or a victim, but as a soul, and this is what the archetype of the self longs for. Not endless entanglement, but conscious union. In this way, the empath who learns distance becomes a pioneer for humanity itself. For what is our collective crisis, if not the inability to hold space without collapsing into violence. Nations, rage, Triebe furred, ideologies clash, all because we cannot bear the tension of difference. If individuals learn the art of quiet distance, if they can hold the tension without erupting in anger, then perhaps humanity can as well. This is the microcosm and the macrocosm. The soul's work is the world's work. Now, some of you may wonder, if distance is so powerful, should we never express anger? Should we never cry out against injustice? Never fight against oppression? No, that would be another distortion. Anger has its place, for it awakens, it cuts through apathy, it defends the weak, but anger alone cannot heal. Anger reveals the wound. But, distance, turns it. Anger opens the door, but distance walks through it. It is not a question of either or, but of sequence and integration. The empath's anger is often the first trembling step, but the true liberation is found in distance. Let me tell you of a woman I once treated, whose life was a testament to this truth. From childhood, she absorbed the violence of her household, standing as shield between father and mother, between siblings who fought. In her adulthood, she repeated the pattern, marrying a man whose rage consumed her, whose projections turned her into the enemy. For years she screamed back, fought back, tried to prove her innocence, but the more she raged, the deeper she sank into despair. One day, in the midst of another storm, she fell silent, not with bitterness, not with fear, but with a clarity that stunned even her. She walked away, not in hatred, but in calm. In that moment, everything shifted. Her husband's rage no longer had a stage. The pattern collapsed. And though he fought harder for a time, eventually he faced himself or fled into the emptiness he could not fill. Her silence had more power than decades of anger. This, too, is the lesson of myth. The hero does not only slay dragons, sometimes the hero simply refuses to play their game. The empath, in choosing distance, refuses the game of projection. They step outside the battlefield, and in doing so, they reveal that the battlefield was an illusion all along. And what is revealed in this silence? The self, that living symbol of divine wholeness, rises from the depths in silence. The still small voice of eternity is heard. In distance, the archetypes rearrange themselves around the new center, and then compassion returns, not the draining compassion of martyrdom, but the luminous compassion of one who gives freely from an inexhaustible source. Such compassion does not deplete. It nourishes. It is not a sacrifice of the self, but an expression of the self. So I ask you now, can you bear the loneliness of distance? Can you endure the misunderstanding, the accusations, the silence of others, in order to find the greater silence within? Can you let the storm pass without rushing to rescue, without shouting against the thunder, without trying to mend what is not yours to mend? If you can, you will discover a power greater than anger, the power of being rooted in your own soul. The empath's quiet distance is not the end of relationship. It is the beginning of true relationship. For only when you no longer carry what is not yours can you truly meet another as they are. And only when you rest in your own wholeness can you love without fear, without need, without the endless compulsion to save. This is individuation. This is the journey into the self. And this, my friends, is the path from fire into stillness, from drowning into flow, from anger into power. What is born in the silence of the empath's distance is not merely personal healing, it is the awakening of a new pattern in the collective unconscious. For the psyche is not an isolated island. Each of us, through our choices, through the way we hold or release the energies of others, participates in shaping the whole. When one empath withdraws from the endless cycle of projection, they ripple that refusal into the fabric of humanity itself. It is as if a thread in the great tapestry has shifted and the pattern must reconfigure around it. Do not underestimate this. Every silent act of distance is a symbolic act that reverberates far beyond what you see. You may think, I am only stepping back from one relationship, from one toxic encounter, but in truth, you are embodying an archetype that speaks across generations. You are saying, the sensitive ones will no longer serve as receptacles for the unacknowledged shadow of the tribe. You are saying, projection ends here. And that declaration, even if whispered in silence, is thunder in the depths of the collective. The dream will often show this moment in grand imagery. A patient once described to me a dream in which she stood before a massive cathedral filled with screaming figures. She placed her hand upon her chest and simply turned away. Behind her, the cathedral crumbled to dust. Yet, she walked into a meadow filled with light. This dream, I told her, was not fantasy, it was prophecy. Her act of withdrawal, small in the waking world, was immense in the symbolic world. For in the psyche, the archetypes are always watching, always rearranging themselves according to the choices we make in consciousness. And so, the empath's distance is not only protection, it is revolution. It is a quiet revolution that does not need banners, weapons, or declarations. It is the revolution of archetypes, shifting of shadows, returning to their rightful owners, of compassion, purified through boundaries. It is the revolution that says, no one will carry another's soul anymore. Each must face what is theirs. Only then can humanity mature. Can the self emerge in wholeness. Yet, as with all revolutions, there is cost. You will be misunderstood. You will be called cold, selfish, aloof. You will feel the ache of solitude, the burning of guilt that comes not from your soul, but from centuries of conditioning. This is why distance requires courage, not the courage of the warrior who wields the sword, but the courage of the sage who holds silence, And though the world may not recognize it, the psyche does, the self sees, and in its mysterious way, it rewards. The reward is not applause, nor recognition, nor even immediate peace. The reward is transformation. You begin to notice that your dreams shift where once you were chased by monsters, now you stand before them calmly, or they dissolve into mist where once you were drowning, now you are swimming in clear waters. The symbols of your unconscious testify to your growth, to your liberation. And in waking life, you begin to taste a different quality of love, not the desperate love that clings and drains, but the luminous love that simply radiates. This love does not bind, it frees. I tell you now, this is the very heart of individuation, for individuation is not the path of merging, but of differentiation. It is the recognition that each soul is a unique expression of the self, and that true union is only possible when each stands whole. The empath's quiet distance is therefore not the end of compassion, but its fulfillment. By withdrawing, you allow yourself to exist as yourself, and in doing so, you allow others the same. Think again of the great figures of myth and history who embodied silence. Christ, who uttered not a word in the face of accusation. The Buddha, who sat unmoved as the armies of illusion swirled. These silences were not passive. They were active. They shattered illusions. They dissolved projections. They transformed the collective in your own small way. When you choose distance, you walk in their footsteps. You enter into the archetype of the one who holds silence as a weapon more powerful than any blade. And in the end, anger itself is not banished, it is integrated. The fire of anger becomes the warmth of clarity, the glow of boundaries. No longer an eruption that destroys, it becomes a flame that lights your way. You do not reject anger, you transmute it. For every archetype, every emotion, every shadow has its place in the great circle of the psyche. The empath who learns distance becomes not a denier of anger, but a master of it. Anger no longer controls them, for they have discovered a greater force, the silence of the self. So, let me leave you with this image. Imagine yourself standing before a vast ocean. Waves crash, storms rage, winds howl. You have spent years swimming in these waters, tossed by currents that were not your own, nearly drowned by storms that belonged to others. But now you step back onto the shore, you stand upon the sand, feet grounded, breath steady. The ocean is still there, wild and untamed, but you are no longer lost within it. You watch, you witness, you allow it to be, and in that distance, you feel your own heartbeat, strong and steady. You realize, I am not the storm, I am the witness, I am not the wave, I am the shore, and from this place, I can love the ocean without being consumed by it. This, my friends, is the power of the empath's quiet distance, more enduring than anger, more transformative than words. It is the silent revolution that restores the soul to itself. It is the step back that reveals the self, and it is the gift, not only to yourself, but to the whole of humanity, that you dare to withdraw, so that truth could finally emerge